So you must completely evaluate the brachial artery, the radial and the ulnar artery. Look for vessel wall calcification, luminal narrowing on grayscale itself, and a good grayscale followed by a color Doppler, as we always do, as we always follow, is the protocol. And you need to do certain maneuvers or certain tests which are required in the preoperative evaluation in your report are the modified Allen's test for patency of the palmar arch and your clenched fist test for reactive hyperemia. So let's go on and see what exactly they are. The anatomy of the upper extremity arteries, I need not really discuss. Everybody's very well. We are radiologists. We've undergone extensive anatomy training. So you have the brachial artery dividing into the ulnar and radial, and then you have this palmar. You have the entire anastomosis in between them, the palmar arch, which needs to be patent, which needs to be studied before you can give a green signal to the vascular surgeon. So how do we do this? So for the arterial evaluation, when you're looking at the feasibility of a radiocephalic fistula, always take a good B mode image of your radial artery right from its origin, from the brachial to its end at the wrist. So now when you're doing this, do a thorough B mode study with copious gel, not too much of mechanical transducer compression, and always measure the diameter of the radial artery in transverse plane. So this gives you a fair idea of your vessel diameter, which is 2 millimeters here. Then, of course, switch on your color Doppler and see that your entire lumen is filling well. And then, of course, you have to do a Doppler sampling where you get a nice triphasic or a multiphasic waveform, which is normal, which is a signature of your peripheral arterial flow. And then you can see this waveform or this slide at the bottom on the right side, which is showing some change kind of pattern of flow. So what exactly have I done here? Let us see. So this is nothing but the test for reactive hyperemia. So in that, what you do is you ask the patient to clench his or her fist very tightly. And then you ask him to keep the fist tightly clenched for say a minute or a minute and a half, which induces a kind of peripheral ischemia, a period of ischemia as the peripheral resistance in the periphery rises. And now after that, after a minute goes, you ask the patient to release the fist. So when the fist is released, you automatically see in a normal vessel that this triphasic waveform, which becomes furthermore triphasic and a very high resistance type when you clench the fist, because the muscles have contracted and your radial artery is facing real high peripheral resistance as it is pumping blood. What exactly you now need to do is ask the patient to release the fist. So when you release the fist, you actually see that there is vasodilatation as a response due to release of nitrous oxide because of this peripherally artificially induced ischemia, which has triggered the endothelium to release nitrous oxide when you release the muscles or when you release the fist. So the vasodilatation automatically takes place and you have this changeover from your triphasic to your monophasic waveform, which is continues throughout the cardiac cycle. And this tells you that you are dealing with healthy endothelium. And yes, this feeder artery, the radial artery, is very suitable to do the job of a feeder artery into the anastomosis because it can distend adequately. So this detects the distensibility or the kind of capability of the artery to distend once it is subjected to an anastomosis. So look at this. Here you have a lot of plaques. You have a completely calcified sort of a radial artery there, and you see that the post-fist release response, how much ever I do, is really suboptimal. And then this is not a very promising finding on your Doppler. Then secondly, you do your second test, which is nothing but the modified Allen's test. So let's see how this is done. So what you do is now this is the wrist end. So this is the caudal end, this is the cranial end. So once you're studying, you're looking at the radial artery, what you do is at the cranial end of the transducer, you block the flow. So you're occluding the flow coming from the heart, and this is the distal end. So what happens is when you occlude the flow, when you're compressing the cranial end of the transducer, there is a backflow coming from the ulnar. Look at that. So that this red flow turns into blue. You can very well see that in this color Doppler video, that initially I have the red flow. As I compress, as I go on pressing at the cranial end of the transducer, I'll play it again, sorry. As I keep compressing and occluding the flow completely, you have the distal radial ulnar reversal coming in. So the flow becomes blue. So I repeat again, I'm compressing here, I'm occluding the flow coming from the heart. This is the wrist end. So the ulnar artery, then once the flow is occluded, to compensate, it starts giving blood in the reverse direction. And that's why you get this red changing over to blue. So this is nothing but your modified Allen's test, which is again tells you that your palmar arch is patent. And yes, preoperative, this is a good sign that this artery is again conducive or good for a construction of the fistula. So again, you can do this by another technique. You compress the radial artery distally, and then you see augmentation of flow in the ulnar artery and vice versa. This also is another maneuver, but somehow I prefer doing it on color Doppler and checking for the reversal in blue color. So once you've finished the entire arterial evaluation, you've ruled out any plaque in the artery, you've ruled out any narrowing stenosis, you've done a good job, identifying the best place where the artery can be used for the anastomosis by the vascular surgeon. Then move on to your vein, because even the vein is a very, very important requirement. So again, the vein B mode evaluation, again, the non-dominant same arm chosen. So what you can do is, if the patient is fit enough, you can make him or her sit and apply a light tourniquet to the upper arm, and then start tracing the vein with copious amount of gel with minimum transducer pressure from the wrist to the arm. And when you do this, observe the vein, that it is a superficial structure from the skin surface. Again, assess its B mode compressibility, its anechoic lumen, as we all are taught that venous thrombosis, you first do B mode, and B mode, try to compress the vein and see that it is easily compressible. So you hardly really need switching on color to, detect patency of a vein. So the AIOM guidelines mention that more or equal to or more than 2.5 millimeter is the optimum caliber, optimum diameter of the vein required for anastomosis. Then, of course, look for adjoining venous tributaries which need ligation. Because again, if you don't ligate those tributaries, you don't have one single channel, the blood gets diverted, and this again can hamper adequate maturation of the fistula. So coming on to your venous anatomy, you have the cephalic vein formed here by the joining of the dorsal venous plexus as a single venous trunk, which moves very much in the superficial vein, very easy to detect. Many times it's used by the nurses for cannulation and placement of IV cannulas if you need to be administered intravenous fluids or drugs. And then you have the cephalic vein traversing right up into the forearm. In the forearm, it becomes slightly deeper than what it was in the forearm. In the arm, it becomes slightly deeper than it was in the forearm, and then it usually pierces the clavipectoral region to pierce and end into the subclavian vein. So you must trace it right into the subclavian vein, and also have a look at the basilic vein, which is medially placed, and you have a communication which is called as a median antecubital vein. Of course, you have a lot of variations coming in these veins, and you can have a lot of normal variance and anatomical variations, of course. So look here, I have now documented this cephalic vein, a very superficial structure in the distal forearm, lots of gel used, minimum transducer pressure, application of the light tourniquet helps you determine how this vein can grow big. And here you can see it's a very good diameter, more than 2.5 millimeter. Here you can see a 3 millimeter diameter of the vein. Again, here you can see the cephalic vein is good, patent, anechoic lumen, easily compressible. And if you want, you can just switch on color and also record a color Doppler image, but that's really not needed. And here you can see an abnormal vein. The venous walls are thick. There's a phlebitis which is set in. Here the vein is completely thrombosed. So of course, you cannot use it, and it's a complete contraindication to mark this site as a site of fistula. So imagine if the vascular surgeon had opened this patient up without doing a Doppler, it would have been a complete failure, because after opening, he realizes that the vein is not open. And sometimes, even by clinical examination, sometimes it is difficult to really determine. So it's always good to do a Doppler and find out. So then record the depth of the vein from the skin surface. Here it is around 5 millimeter. So look for lumen, wall thickening, thrombosis. Again, diameter of 2.5 or more is ideal after compression, is what AIOM guidelines say. But honestly, in the Indian population, these CRF patients are frail. They have a lot of muscle wasting, and usually, if it is even 1.8 to 2 millimeter, I do mark and give it a chance. And I just don't always disqualify it if it's around 2 millimeter and uniform in caliber. Then the vein, as I said, must be traced entirely for patency and diameter, must be superficial enough for easy access. Any large branches need to be noted, as I said, because large branches coming from the vein and, diverting blood again can lead to, delayed maturation of the fistula, and later again the patient has to be explored and the large branch ligated. So it's always good to draw a diagram and send when you have a look at the cephalic vein anatomy. Basilic vein is examined in case the cephalic vein is not optimum. So again, this diagram, so that's the basilic vein, medial. Again, you measure the diameter and give the details as to how deep it is from the skin surface. So let's have a look here of your peripheral cephalic vein. Let's see how you trace it on B mode. Use minimal compression. See there, that you can easily see here. I'll play it again. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how you scan the cephalic vein, always in B mode in the transverse plane. Be slow, keep tracing it cranially as much as you can. Now here you can very well see that there's a tributary there, so you can mark it there because these tributaries sometimes do, hamper adequate maturation of the fistula. And you can actually draw a schematic diagram and give it when you are preoperatively giving a report for suitability of the vessels. So try and trace the vein as cranial as you can into the forearm and into the clavipectoral region. So once you have seen the vein adequately in your forearm and arm, trace it into the clavipectoral region. So here I'm tracing it high up, and this is in the clavipectoral region that you see it traversing the muscle layer and entering the subclavian vein, which is very well seen. You'll see it now happening. And yes, so this is the junction of the cephalic vein with the subclavian vein. You can see a venous valve there. And this is very important to rule out any narrowing at the side, because if there is a narrowing at the side, it will completely lead to failure of the fistula when the anastomosis is done. So try and trace the vein as cranial as you can. If you're able to do this, if you're able to trace the vein, especially, it can be a little difficult in thick patients, in obese patients, but still pick up the convex transducer. And when you can see it entering the subclavian vein there, it becomes, yes, you have documented that, and it's full proof that the cephalic vein has no narrowing, that there's a nice valve sitting there, and then you've done a lot of good job for the vascular surgeon. Yes. So after you've seen the cephalic vein adequately, or if the cephalic vein is not there, the basilic vein adequately, you confirm that it is patent, it is good in caliber, uniform in caliber all throughout. Then, of course, you can never end the examination before you look at the deep veins. Assess the deep veins for patency. Now, how do you do that? You actually can't see the central innominate veins on ultrasound. So these deep veins, the internal jugular and the subclavian, form a mirror, because the waveforms are actually nothing but your transmitted cardiac pulsatility, and unilateral or bilateral monophasic waveforms are very much abnormal. And if you find such abnormal waveforms, you must point to look at the brachiocephalic and or SVC with the help of cross-sectional imaging or conventional angiography if an access placement is desired. So let's look at this internal jugular and the subclavian veins here. This is a normal deep venous waveform. So you have kind of two waves there. One is a little shallow, one is a little deep. So this is nothing but your respiratory phasicity, because when you inspire, your intrathoracic pressure falls and you have increasing venous return coming there. And when the patient expires, you have lesser venous return. So this is your respiratory phasicity, which is depicted here. And this pulsatility is nothing but because of your transmitted right atrial pulsations. So this is a very normal waveform, and you're sure that your innominate and your SVC are patent. So these are some studies done by Wong et al., Silva et al., which tell you that your radial artery diameters optimally required for constructing an AVF preoperatively are 1.6 millimeter by this Wong et al. Silva et al. Says 2 millimeter. For the cephalic vein, the cutoff is 1.6 millimeter in the study done by Wong et al. And Silva et al., they say 2.5 millimeter. But believe me, in the Indian population, yes, you do get such sizes of 1.6 millimeter to 2 millimeter only. You really will hardly ever get a 2.5 millimeter vein if you're lucky enough to scan a younger patient with CRF. So when you finished your study, it's always good to put your findings on the report. So this is how I report it. You talk about the arterial evaluation, you talk about the entire anatomy of the brachial, radial, ulnar, mention if there is an anatomical variant. Sometimes you may have high origins of the radial, sometimes you may have low origins. So always mention that on your report. It's always prudent to draw a diagram at the end showing your entire venous anatomy, arterial anatomy that helps. And you can also actually mark the vein with a sketch pen with a permanent marker on the skin, and the entire vein that should not be marked, only mark the site which you feel is the most optimum and sort of the best place where the surgeon can really take an incision and construct the fistula. So this is the protocol, or this is the reporting format I follow. I've been following this for years together now. So it's always good to end it with a diagram. Then coming on to the actual evaluation of a fistula. So once the fistula is constructed, it takes around 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks for it to mature and become usable for hemodialysis. So what exactly do you need to know is the maturation of the fistula. So a fistula is said to have matured when the venous diameter exceeds 6 millimeter and the volume flow measurements are above 600 ml per second. If both these criteria are met, more than 95% of the AVFs can be used for hemodialysis. The outflow vein depth, which is 6 millimeter or 6 millimeter before the skin surface, is always better. Maturation is likely if blood flow through the fistula is 250 to 500 ml per minute on post-op day 1 and 500 to 900 ml per minute in 1 month after construction of the anastomosis. It takes around 4 to 6 weeks for maturation. So this is a nice article by ML Robin, who's done a lot of work in hemodialysis access ultrasound evaluation. This was published in Radiology 2002. Now let's go on to a very methodical, a very protocol-based evaluation of the fistula itself. So whenever you have a patient, say suppose, there is a problem of the hemodialysis taking a long time, it usually takes around 3 to 4 hours, but if it's getting prolonged more than that, you really need to look at the draining vein. Then how do I go about it? You have confusions. I get frantic calls from radiologists as to how this is to be done. This is the finding. So in order to, not get frightened, do it very methodically. Let's go on a very protocol-based manner. So you always start evaluating with the feeder artery, then go on to the anastomosis, then go on to the draining vein, do draining vein flow, volume flow measurements. After you've done that, do deep venous evaluation. After that, you must do flow to the hand evaluation, which I will explain all this in the subsequent slides. And your examination should be both B mode and Doppler. Always begin with B mode, again with a lot of gel, with least transducer pressure, so as to get the correct information regarding the vessel, lumen, and the sizes. So when you are constructing an AV fistula, suppose this is the inflow artery and this is your outflow vein. Now what happens is you're completely diverting blood from this inflow artery coming from the heart towards the vein in the opposite cranial direction. And hence you have this distal arterial resistance which comes in, and you start getting steal phenomenon. So if the entire blood is diverted into the vein, hardly anything reaching into the distal artery, then you start getting those typical waves of arterial steal, which I will show in the subsequent slides. So what are the risk factors for AVF failure? It's females are more prone to failure, older age group, patients with vascular comorbidities, as is obvious. So measurement of volume flow, you really don't need to memorize this formula. It's there all in your machines. You just need to correctly sample the vessel, and you have the machine actually, just calculating the time average mean velocity and the volume flow for you on its own. All the latest machines do that very efficiently. So now I'm sorry. Here's I've tried to take everything in one slide. So here's the artery. I've shown here. You can very well see the anastomosis, and then here very well you can see the draining vein. So on B mode itself, you're very sure that there is no anastomotic narrowing. The radial artery is beautifully connected to your vein. So a good B mode, a kind of good B mode documentation helps a long way to go about your HD access Doppler evaluation. So whenever you evaluate AV fistula, always be very slowly and carefully scan. Start with the feeder artery, as I said. Then try and document where the anastomosis is. So here you can very well see you are now moving. This is your feeder artery here with the vena comitans, and you can see that, yes, so here you can very well see that the anastomosis is here. And try and document videos if you can, but if not, at least document could be more pictures. So here you can very well see that the artery is bifurcating, and then you have the radial getting anastomosed with the cephalic vein. So when you start evaluating the feeder artery, what you can see is a continuous monophasic waveform here in the pre-anastomotic segment of the radial artery. So ideally, by guidelines, if you have a fistula in the distal forearm, you have a radiocephalic fistula, you must sample the radial artery approximately 2 centimeters. Cranial, I use the word cranial and caudal, better than proximal or distal. Proximal distal may create some confusion. So I always sample the feeder artery 2 centimeters cranial to the anastomosis, where I find a monophasic waveform, a beautiful continuous waveform throughout this flow continuously there throughout the cardiac cycle, gives me a hint that yes, I am looking at a patent fistula. Now, why is this so? Because your radial artery is now anastomosed to a vein, and a vein is of a bigger diameter. So your entire peripheral resistance of the capillary circulation is bypassed, and now you have the radial artery directly pumping into the vein, and that's why the entire peripheral resistance goes away and you get a continuous monophasic flow like what you see in your renal artery bed or maybe your placental circulation. So this is how the feeder artery looks in a patent fistula. That is, this complete change from triphasic flow to your monophasic continuous high velocity type of flow. Then you go on to check the anastomosis, and then you go on to check the draining vein. So draining vein becomes arterialized. The venous flow patterns are lost because you have the arterial supply coming in through the direct anastomosis. So let's go through the complications, and let's go through the protocols of scanning. When we look at these complications, we need to know how exactly the Doppler needs to be done and how exactly grading of stenosis and all goes on. So what are the common complications? Thrombosis, very common. It's the commonest complication, followed by venous, the draining vein stenosis or anastomotic stenosis. Peri-AVF collections, aneurysmal dilatation, pseudoaneurysms, deep venous thrombosis, that is a swollen upper limb, Steele phenomenon, etc. Now let's go on and look at how a draining vein thrombosis looks. The vein is distended, all completely filled with thrombus. It's very self-explanatory, and it's really disastrous for the surgeon and the patient both. So here is a thrombus sitting right at the anastomotic site. So earlier the detection of thrombosis, the better. Maybe you can, give anticoagulant injections and, hope for, again, reopening the fistula. So now this is a very important part of the talk, which is, grading stenosis. So how exactly, if you have a draining vein stenosis, how do you report it? What is exactly a significant stenosis? Let's go on through these points. So look for visual B mode stenosis, assess in the transverse plane with least transducer pressure. Significant stenosis is defined as luminal narrowing equal to or exceeding 50% compared with the vascular segment situated caudally or upstream from the diagnosis or from the stenosis, and increased peak systolic velocity at the stenosis site to the PSV ratio of 3:1 is what is taken as significant for anastomotic narrowing, and 2:1 for draining vein stenosis. So let me explain this to you now. So I have these two diagrams here. So now you have the feeder artery here, which is feeding into the draining vein, and you have the flow going cranially like this. So when you are suspecting a draining vein stenosis, suppose I have the draining vein narrow here, say a few centimeters cranial to your anastomosis. So your blood flow, what you sample, or the velocity you sample at the narrowing, if it is 2 times that of the caudal segment, which is just prior to the stenosis, if it is 2 times that of the prior segment. So if this is X, this is 2X, then yes, you are dealing with a significant, hemodynamically significant draining vein stenosis. Whereas if you're dealing with an anastomotic narrowing, now this is the feeder artery, and you have the draining vein here. So suppose the velocity at the anastomosis is 3 times that of the feeder artery, then that becomes an hemodynamically significant anastomotic narrowing. So here's a case sitting here. So I could see draining vein narrowing very much on B mode. Now I do a longitudinal section. I start color Doppler. Color Doppler is showing that there is aliasing here. And I then sample the site of narrowing. I get velocities around 600. And just prior to that, or just caudal to that, I've sampled and I get a velocity of around 300. So that tells me that yes, this is a hemodynamically significant venous draining vein stenosis. Now here's the feeder artery flow. Note it is monophasic. The feeder artery flow here is around 170 centimeters per second is your peak systolic velocity. I go to the anastomosis, looks very open, similar aliasing even at the anastomosis. The velocities are around 333. So 170 and 333, which is less than 3 times. So 3 times would be 73 are 51. So if it was more than 500, yes, I would have called it as something significant going on there. So this high velocity of 300 at the anastomosis is absolutely normal, absolutely good, which is going to give you a good hemodialysis. So here's the case, B mode. There was definite narrowing of the lumen here at the anastomosis. We switched on color, yes, some aliasing there, and then we did a proper color Doppler. So just proximally, I could get a feeding artery, just upstream, I could get a feeding artery velocity of 67. Whereas when I actually sample the anastomosis, I'm getting something 10 times higher, telling me that, yes, this is a significant stenosis of the anastomosis. Now, same case, upstream or cranial to that anastomotic narrowing, I was getting some kind of a post-anastomotic dilatation, followed by again some, followed by a very low volume flow of only 208 ml per minute in the draining vein. So, which was really not adequate for a fistula, and the patient was not, optimally the dialysis could not be done, and hence was referred directly from the dialysis center for a Doppler. Now, what I could see here is again a thrombus in the draining vein as well. And the entire thing summed up, post-anastomotic dilatation in the draining vein, followed by, low volume flow, again, a thrombus here. So it was a complication. And in addition, in the same patient, we also found median cubital vein thrombosis. So to sum up, we had put all the findings together: significant anastomotic narrowing of the radiocephalic anastomosis with post-stenotic dilatation of the draining vein thrombosis, another significant finding. Thrombosis of the median cubital vein coexisted, and there was also dampened and reversal flow in the radial artery at rest, which I'll show subsequently. So then again, you can draw a proper diagram as to what exactly is going on, which gives you a complete overview just in one diagram, one schematic diagram, and your work is done or simplified in a much better way. Another example, recent case, anastomotic narrowing. So feeder artery, just cranial to anastomosis, you're getting a flow of 102 there as peak systolic velocity. And whereas at the anastomosis, you have something going on to 424. So certainly more than 3 times, which tells you that this anastomotic stenosis is hemodynamically really significant. So just one video which I've added. So I wonder why the videos are running so slow. It's really not running really. Anyway, some issue. Okay. So another case of draining vein narrowing. Now here, what I put this picture because what you can see sometimes is this typical intimal thickening, which comes up in draining veins, which is significant. And this intimal thickening happens because of, repeated dialysis punctures. It becomes like a vicious cycle. And this leads to draining vein narrowing and your, reduced volume flow in the fistulae cranial to it, which hampers, adequate hemodialysis. So again, area of narrowing here, and you can see that the velocities are pretty high at the site of narrowing with a gradient of more than 2:1. Another similar example, absolute proper intimal thickening there in the draining vein, leading to a high velocity flow, leading to draining vein stenosis and low volume flows beyond it. So, of course, when I'm talking of this, one would definitely ask me, what are the optimum volume flows for a fistula? So the optimum volume flow for a good hemodialysis to take place, the volume flow should be between 600 to around 1,300 or 1,000, even 1,500 ml per minute, which is absolutely optimal. And when you get volume flows beyond 1,500, then you need to have a good cardiac reserve. So if you have a patient with a weak heart, with, with a history of LVF and all, then the fistula may have to be done away with, because then that can really cause to, a lot of cardiac load. Okay, so again, further moving on to complications, thrombosis of the feeder artery. Now, this was a radial artery, which was a feeder artery itself was thrombosed, no flow. And so what you can see is the actual volume of patent flow coming. The RBCs are hitting the thrombus, actually hitting the thrombus, which you can very well see here. And the same thing on B mode as well. So you can see a actual thrombus sitting in the artery. And when you sample this column of blood, column of RBCs, which is just proximal, what you see is the classic pre-occlusive thump. So this pre-occlusive thump tells you that it is a very fresh thrombus. It is acute thrombosis. There is no collateral as such formed. And this is very signature kind of a waveform of complete thrombosis, which has just come up there. Then you have perivenous collections happening. Sometimes while puncturing, the technologist cannot puncture the vein because he gets some fluid, or he skips the vein. The vein really slips out of the cannula, and it may happen because of perivenous collections in the immediate 4 to 6 weeks period, which can really persist beyond a few months. So in that case, you may even have to put in a needle and drain those collections for a better outcome. Then aneurysmal dilatation, you may have patients coming with the arm source with such a prominent, such a bulbous kind of a tortuous vein in the superficial fascia of the arm or forearm. And this happens because of aneurysmal dilatation, wherein the venous diameters really become very big, 17 millimeters is the size here. And this usually happens because of repeated punctures, which results in multiple fibrous scars along the venous wall, leads to aneurysmal dilatation, and the high flow states in the vein can damage the intimal lining. These may be long-standing with patients continuing dialysis, and care must be taken during punctures, as these can have life-threatening complications of hemorrhage. And these veins usually have real high volume flows because of the big lumens that they possess. Then pseudoaneurysms, another contained kind of a fibrous cavity in which you have yin-yang flow pattern, not a true aneurysm, but actually happens in the fibrous perivascular wall in the soft tissue or in the surrounding connective tissue. Again, very common. It may have to be, you may have to inject thrombin and ultrasound guided, and then treat it in cases of AV fistula. So the interventional guys again come into picture here. Then this is a very interesting case of a swollen limb. Now, at the start of my presentation, I very well mentioned about the importance of tracing the cephalic vein right up to the subclavian vein into the clavipectoral region. Now, here's a narrowing at the junction of the subcephalic and the subclavian vein. And this led to very high aliasing and very high flow, as high as almost 500 centimeters per second. And this high flow there led to the patient come with a very swollen limb. And this was again proven on your catheter angio. You can actually see the stenosis marked by the arrow there. So it's very important, even post-operatively, to trace the vein right up to the draining vein. Just a minute. Just give me a second. Yes. Continue. So this is a case of a swollen limb with stenosis at the junction of the cephalic vein and the subclavian vein. Now, again, very important, look at the artery distal to the anastomosis. So what do you mean by an arterial steal happening? So you can very well see that there is an antegrade flow during systole and a complete retrograde flow during diastole. Tells you that there is reversal of flow, and when you gently compress the venous side, you see that the flow becomes forward, and this is a classic sign of radial steal happening there. So you can see this classical steal waveform there, and then when I compress the venous side, By compressing the venous side, you're like, occluding the fistula, and then you start getting forward radial flow. So now the importance of this, again, if you have a compromised ulnar artery, patient can become very symptomatic. You can have numb tingling, very bad tingling numbness coming up during the hemodialysis, or you can even have gangrenous changes coming up in very bad cases where the fistula has to be abandoned or has to be sacrificed. So stage 1 of this STEEL is retrograde diastolic flow without complaint, STEEL phenomenon. Stage 2, pain on exertion and or during hemodialysis. Stage 3 is rest pain, and stage 4 is ulceration, necrosis, or gangrene. Then coming on to AV grafts, well, right now I hardly come across AV grafts. They are not done anymore. Cumbersome, expensive, lot of complications, infections. But just to summarize, you have the PTFE or the polytetrafluoroethylene grafts, which are either forearm loop grafts or upper arm straight graft and loop grafts. So here is your straight graft joining the artery and the vein, whereas you have certain loop grafts also which can be placed. Now, grafts have their own complications. They have complications similar to those which occur in arteries. I don't have too many cases of grafts as I hardly see them nowadays, but a few which I have in the archives. Here is a graft pseudoaneurysm. Here is a graft thrombus. So they can have similar complications just like a native fistula, but they have far, far more number of complications than native fistulae. Again, multiple pseudoaneurysms along the graft. So native is always preferred. Native fistula is always long-lasting, higher patency, less infection and complication rates, and of course the cost in the developing world. So that's how you summarize your report. That's how you put a reporting format. You mention about your B-mode and color Doppler evaluation. You measure about the feeder artery. Then you mention about the anastomosis. You mention about the draining vein, volume flow. And then you have to end the exam by looking at the radial artery distally, ruling out STEEL, and then of course your deep venous examination has to be done, and then you label it as a functioning fistula or a fistula with complications. So to conclude, pre-evaluation or mapping of upper extremity artery and veins is extremely useful to choose a site. It's teamwork with a vascular surgeon, and post-operatively, ultrasound and color Doppler is kind of a established, beautiful modality to assess the function and complications of a hemodialysis axis, which is a lifeline for CRF patients. Thank you very much for